boys and girls, it's Mrs. Scales here to teach you about the human life cycle today. This really ties in with our classwork with the human reproductive system, which is the last system of the human body that we're going to go over. So let's go ahead and dive in. Some questions that will be answered today. What are the stages of human development before birth while the baby is still inside the mom? How the developing baby gets nutrients in the first place. We'll go over childbirth and what happens when babies are born, and then what changes occur from infancy to adulthood with the human body. All right, so we're going to go over how the baby looks before birth. The very first thing is conception and fertilization. So fertilization is when the sperm cell unites with the egg cell, and then that is the start of life. This does happen inside of the fallopian tubes of the female reproductive system. And now this fertilized egg is a combination of both the mother and the father, and we call this a zygote. So the zygote is the fertilized egg. Now, as that zygote begins to grow and change and get bigger, we call that the embryo. The baby is called an embryo up until 8 weeks of life. After that, we call it a fetus from 9 weeks up until the time that it's born. So what you see here, this is an embryo, so it's under 8 weeks old, and you can see how it's starting to look more human. You can see the eyes, you can see the head, and we'll learn all about this today. All right, so here's this process of fertilization when it happens inside the mother. So this is a female reproductive system that you see in the diagram. Here's one of the ovaries. It releases an egg cell, which is what you see right here. If there's a sperm cell inside of the fallopian tube, then what happens, it unites with the egg cell, and then it fertilizes and begins to make a baby. And then that cell, which is called a zygote now, it starts to grow and divide, and it goes through mitosis, and those cells split. Those cells will travel down to the next part of the female reproductive system, which is called the uterus, and the zygote will attach to the uterine wall of the female, and then from that point on, that's where the baby grows. All right, here's how the baby looks inside the mother. So you have the development of it. You can see where it starts from fertilization, and as it grows into an embryo up until the fetal stage, which is after 9 weeks. And here's a real picture of how it looks. These are all real human embryos that you see. The baby will start to have a heartbeat by a month into the pregnancy. So that's like the first trimester. And you will see here that it will just keep growing more and more human-like and start to form more and more of the organs. Like the hands start to form, the eyes start to form. So it's really cool to look at this. Now, while the baby is inside the mother, it's being nourished and it's being protected. So for the protection of it, there is a membrane that surrounds the outside of the baby. It's called the amniotic sac. It's filled with this fluid called the amniotic fluid. The fluid, it protects and cushions the baby and just makes it to where, if something just gently bumps the mom, it's not going to hurt the baby. So it kind of floats around in this fluid. Because the baby is floating around in fluid, it can't breathe in oxygen through air. It has to take in oxygen through the blood. So the mother's blood feeds oxygen and feeds nutrients from the food that she eats by way of the placenta. The placenta is a separate membrane that is on the inside, and it is a link between the mother and the baby. And the placenta helps to feed the nutrients to the mother by way of the blood. Now, the way that the baby is connected to this placenta is by the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord has blood vessels that run through it, and those attach to the placenta, and that blood feeds oxygen and nutrients to the baby so that it can grow bigger by each day. Now, one of the things about the placenta is that whatever the mom eats, the baby eats. So this is why it's very important for mothers as they are pregnant to make sure that they don't do drugs, drink alcohol, smoke, or take in any kind of medication that might hurt the baby, because whatever is inside the mother's blood, it will eventually go to the baby and potentially hurt the baby if the mom is not careful. So you can see in this picture here that the baby is upside down, and that's the way that they're born. They're born head first. They can be flipped the other way, but it's harder to give birth that way. So typically, any babies that are born feet first, it might be a little bit more painful for the mom. We call that being breeched when you're born that way. Now, the baby is connected to this placenta by the umbilical cord. You can see right here the amniotic sac that surrounds it. It looks like an egg, basically. It is filled with fluid. Whenever the mother's water breaks, that fluid rushes out, and that's the water that she feels. And you can see that the mom still has all of her other parts that we learned, like the intestines and stuff. Also, the bladder would be down here. The baby actually squeezes onto the bladder, and that's what makes mothers have to run to the bathroom a lot. So, some things that you need to know: the placenta feeds the baby, and it feeds it using the mother's blood. Alright, now this next picture is pretty graphic. You're going to see the placenta and a baby, and this is a real picture. If you don't want to see it, just skip ahead in the video so you don't have to see it. I just thought it'd be kind of cool for you to see how it looks. Now, here's what it looks like. The baby is attached to the placenta that you can see here, and again, this is kind of gory, it's kind of bloody because it feeds the baby blood, and that goes through the umbilical cord into this area here, and that's how it looks. So when a baby is being born, there's 3 basic stages. We have labor, we have delivery, and we have afterbirth. The labor is the part that's like the hardest, and it can take the longest. This is the part where the mother's cervix starts to get wider and starts contracting, and this is after the water breaks. And basically what it's doing is getting bigger so the baby can fit through the birth canal. So that takes the longest and can take up to 20 hours or even longer for some women. After that is delivery, and this is where the baby actually gets pushed out of the mother's body. Again, typically this is head first, or that's the normal way it's supposed to happen. This can take anywhere from a couple minutes to an hour, so this is shorter than the labor part. And then we have something called the afterbirth, which is after the baby is pushed out, and this is where the mother pushes out the placenta that you saw in the last picture. And then also there's a little note down here at the bottom that C-sections are basically at step 2, when instead of delivery, the baby is being surgically removed out of the mother, and that's like taking place at step 2, which is the delivery part. Alright, so a couple of things that I wanted to show you about babies when they're born. The first thing is that when a baby is born, we do cut the umbilical cord. I know probably in movies and stuff you probably saw that, like the father will cut the cord. So the cord is cut, and that little piece that scars that you see there, that is our belly button. So if you go look at your belly button, that's where your umbilical cord was once connected to the placenta or to the mom. Now, another little side note is that one of the best things doctors like to hear is the baby crying when it's first born. That lets the doctor know that the baby is 1, breathing, and 2, alive and well. So, and also this lets the doctor know that the lungs are working. When a baby cries when it's first born, this is the first time ever that the lungs pick up oxygen from the air that surrounds us. Remember that the baby's been in this fluid, it's been in this like watery substance, so the lungs haven't been taking in oxygen through the air When it cries, this is the first time that fluid is coming out of the lungs and it's using air for the first time. So doctors love to hear this baby cry because it lets them know that those lungs are working. All right, so here's a little side note for any of you that are interested about multiple births. So if you see a twin that is identical, that means that they came from the same egg and same sperm cell. What happens is something causes that egg to split through mitosis, and then they grow into two separate people inside the mother. So it's for identical twins. For fraternal twins, there was, for some reason we don't really fully understand, there was 2 eggs that were released at the same time instead of just one. And because the egg, there's 2 of them, they can get fertilized from 2 different sperm cells, so that arise in 2 different people that grow, that look a little different from one another. They can also be different sexes. So that's for the fraternal twins. All right, so the next part I'm going to go over with you is how we develop and change after birth. So the first stage of life when you're out of your mom is called infancy. This is when you're a baby. This is like the first 2 years of your life. Your body is going through a lot of changes. One, you're, becoming more coordinated. Your muscles are working. Your bones are growing. You're starting to learn things like how to walk, how to talk. You're having to use your eyes and your lungs for the first time. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in infancy. Stage 2 is childhood. And this is like, if you think like when you were in elementary school or a toddler, childhood is when your body is, of course, getting bigger. You're starting to be more aware of language and using your brain to problem solve. And also another thing is you're becoming more social. Like you have friends at this stage. And then the third one is adolescence. This is when you're a preteen or a teenager, and your body is becoming more developed. You're starting to look more adult-like. You're starting to become mentally more like an adult. And this is also when puberty happens, when your body goes through those sexual changes and you start to mature that way. And then the very last stage is adulthood, which adulthood, the clear cutoff from adolescence to adulthood is not really, the same as it is like, everybody says when you're 18, you're adult. But your body actually doesn't go through those different time frames. So the cutoff for adolescence to adulthood is kind of like different for each person. What we do know is that around the age of 30, your body begins to age and your skin becomes more wrinkled. You may get gray hair. Your muscles are not as strong. And then eventually, you start to get older. All right, guys. So that is my presentation for you. Hopefully you learned a lot today about how the fetus looks before it's born, about childbirth, and about how we develop and change as we get older. So that is the end for human body.